There's some fabulous things that flexibility has created. I think it's just making sure you get the balance right.
I've read something recently that was saying that most projects essentially are never delivered on budget. Right. How do you or transformation, in general, how do you really mitigate that risk?
I think it's about understanding what your end goal is, like identifying what success looks like at the other end and being really clear about that.
Connie Beck, Group Director of IT Transformation and Digital at Urbis and Chair of the Board at AIPM, brings over 25 years of global experience across consulting, managed services, M&A, and project and portfolio management. She's worked with some of the biggest names, including Freehills, Coles, Australia Post, Simplot, and Incitec Pivot. Through that period, it's obviously an incredible step away from Freehills to what you did. How were you intentionally shaping your career?
It was a pretty unpleasant time, quite frankly. It was probably definitely the low point in my career. One minute you're an executive, you're really successful, and then your role is moved or redundant. I found myself in the world of Melbourne with many other executives. And it was really confronting is probably the best way to put it.
Yep.
Always plan for redundancy. You can be redundant, don't become redundant.
With a career built on driving digital transformation and project excellence, Connie has seen firsthand how the industry has evolved and where it's heading next. Today, she's here to share her incredible career journey as an enabler with a project management mindset and her experiences of going through redundancy. Anyway, so Connie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You've built an amazing career initially around program management and also across digital transformation and in technology. And today I'm really keen to, I guess there's two things in particular that I really want to dive into with you. And that's how you shaped your career and how you've achieved the things that you have achieved. And also, I guess, trying to get some insight into where you see the future of digital transformation and technology and where that's heading and what you're excited about, I guess. But I'm going to go back to where it started. And I saw that you spent 18 years, which is an incredible innings, with Freehills, the law firm.
Yeah.
So tell me about that time. What were you up to at Freehills, and where did that lead you?
Yeah, so I started off in the legal world in a partnership-based organisation, which is strangely enough where I've ended up now. I do have a bit of a passion for that shareholder setup. Beautiful company. I think I had most of my milestones there in my personal life, but also I think it was a smaller firm at the time. Whilst I started off in the legal world, I travelled throughout the firm, as many do. So it sort of went from the legal world and veered into the technology industry when it was just starting out, probably showing my age a little bit there, but I didn't really want to work on the legal side. And because I had been there for so long, one of the partners said to me, please don't leave. We'll create a job for you. Give me 24 hours. Let's see what we've got for you. And that was the most beautiful gesture. And I remember thinking, no, I really do want to change. And he came back to me next morning and he said, Connie, we've got this new area of our business called information services, and we think it might take off. Would you like to just give it a go? And if you don't like it, you can still move on. So I went into information services, really small team who I'm still good friends with today. They're beautiful. And went and managed their procurement contracts and the legalities involved in setting up brand new, technology contracts and services. So that was the first part of that pivot into a different world for me. And then from that was working with a fabulous line manager that I reported to, Vic Wotherspoon, if you're out there. And he really veered me into project management. And I was actually pregnant with my first child. So it was a long time ago. And I think I've definitely got Vic to thank for. And he said, look, why don't you just manage these projects? And one of those was the project where nothing happened, Y2K project. And then there were others in the data centre and things like that. But Y2K was the first one. And it was the most wonderful project where we did so much work. And one could argue it was preventative, and that's why nothing happened. But I was heavily pregnant with my daughter, and I was studying as well. And so it was I think at that time quite fondly actually, because that was that real interchange of a change in my career. I was studying, I was getting into project management. There's lots of change in my life. And so I stayed at Freehills, and my career took almost a fresh start. and kept on going.
It's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes when there's so much change going on, you need a constant. And the employer was the constant, right? But
it was.
And I think, there's a lot of talk these days about talent management and talent retention, all this kind of stuff. And I think the secret to that is identifying the potential in people and giving them opportunity. And I think, interestingly, at the moment, we're seeing a lot of that in cybersecurity.
Yes.
It's one of probably the biggest growth markets or skills or jobs, functions, whatever you want to call it, according to LinkedIn. But most of those people I'm seeing moving into those roles are BAs, or they're working in account management, or they're doing something else in the business. And it's a new job, it's a new function. So how do you recruit that externally? You don't. You look within your current talent pool. Just out of curiosity, so what were you doing when you first started there? Was that kind of you in a traditional legal?
I was actually studying law.
Right.
And then I just decided it wasn't for me. So I was very early in the piece. And then I worked in various roles with some of the partners in EA roles whilst I was studying, and just kept on moving throughout the firm. And then really ended up, and I stayed in the information services arena for quite a while. But I think, as you said, it was that constant. And I think the other thing too was that I was very fortunate to be in a world where, if you think about, I think we're in a different world now with families, work-life balance, probably thanks to the awful COVID, where there's a lot more flexibility. That wasn't really around in 1998, 1999 when people were starting up with families. So realistically, I was in a firm that was ahead of itself. Free Hills was smaller. We had a thing called maternity leave. We had work from home. I did all that. And that was a very important part of, being female and growing your career and studying. I was really lucky that I had paid leave. I got to work from home one day a week whilst I was waiting for my baby to come, and I got to work from home one day a week whilst I was on maternity leave after 6 months. So all those things were part of my life, and that was very rare back then. So when we talk about I was there for a long time, I was there because I was treated really well. I felt part of the family. There were benefits there that kept, that employee value prop was really attractive, and you wanted to be loyal because you were taken care of. And so part of my own career journey, and I suppose this does happen with a lot of us females, is you have to incorporate work-life balance, which is 50% work, 50% personal. And you have to say, where am I going in my life? So I chose to stay there whilst I had 2 children. That was a very intentional part of my work life, because I needed stability and I was still studying and growing my career. So that was on purpose. And I was amazing. Very happy. I wouldn't say I stayed there because I wasn't happy. I was treated very well, and I did love my time there.
Well, I think, happiness at work is so much talk about it, right? And the pursuit of happiness, that's almost a fool's errand to a certain degree, because the peak of happiness is never sustainable, right? And I think that to me, happiness at work is about feeling fulfilled, feeling stretched, feeling given opportunity, respected, safe, all those kind of things. And it's definitely something when I kind of talk with younger people coming into careers about, which is go and find the right environment, the right culture that brings out the best in you, because the rest will follow. Don't be doing the job that you wanted to do, but in a crappy environment, because you're going to hate the job pretty quick.
That's right.
Feel disenchanted, your career's going to slow down. Because, it's how we make our living, but it's how we spend a lot of our time. You deserve to be happy and enjoying as much of that as you possibly can.
And it's funny that you say that, because one of the things I've done with my current team is trained all 50 people on a development plan. And the development plan isn't just about your career. So the pack that you fill out is about your personal goals, pay off your house, buy a car, go on a holiday, do some study, and your work goals. And you can't complete the pack unless you combine the two. And so every manager, I've trained my whole team, so about 50 people, and they sit down with their line manager and they talk about their personal goals, they talk about their career goals and what training they need. And I'm a big believer in will versus skill. And so if you've got someone with a fabulous attitude, you want to grow them and retain them. So we've done, 10 promotions in the last 8 months in our team. Amazing. Now, if you went out to market, you wouldn't have got the role, but we want to retain and grow people. And so that whole program's been really successful, and we're continuing to do it. But I also feel like my gift back to generations that report to me now is the same as what someone did to me. And that is, I want to keep you. I love working with you, but I'm going to help you grow. And I just think that if everyone does a bit of that, we've got a workforce that's really struggling to come up in the world. What do I do? Where do I go? What's technology doing? And it's lovely to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's so much talk about flexibility. And my concern at the moment is we're missing the point of flexibility, right? We're obsessed. Is it three days in the office, 4 days in the office, or none? But that's not flexibility. That's just telling people where they're going to work on which days. It's an organisation. Right. Flexibility is looking at someone's personal life circumstances, looking at their goals, looking at the skills, how they want to develop, what they want to contribute to the organisation. There may be something that someone's got going on in their personal life that means that they can't bring all of themselves to work at that moment. It doesn't mean that's forever, and that can change as well.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I think there's also we've lost some really good candidates because they don't want to come in at all, and that's really hard because we do have an integration probation ask where it is 4 days plus one and at home, and then there can be flexed from there because that part is integrating into the firm, getting to know your peers, solidifying relationships around you in the office. And I actually do believe if you don't do that part first, you don't know your culture and the people you work with. But I think flexibility, right, it's gone a little far, but you're right, it's about circumstances. And it could change. It doesn't have to be 3-2 and it doesn't have to be 4-1. Most of my team, we all come in 4-1 and we all do Fridays from home because that's the non-meeting kind of day in the office. So if you're not in the office, it doesn't matter too much. But we're lucky in our Melbourne office, we're at capacity. We've got too many people to desks.
Right.
So we've actually got the reverse problem. That's a great thing. And, you get a morning tea. We have wonderful culture at Urbis. They have morning teas, which are just smashing. You look at the office and you just see a sea of faces. And it's just beautiful, but it's quite surprising not every office is like that. But I think flexibility post-COVID, it's great for families, but when you get to a stage where you can't have an all-hands meeting with your team because everyone doesn't want meetings from 3 to 5 on a Monday or something like that. You're like, well, hang on, is that flexibility or is that just, I get school pickup, but how does that work now? So we're trying to navigate this new flexibility.
Well, flexibility is give and take. And I think just because you want certain flexibility, that may not be the best thing for the team.
No, that's right.
And I think you can't ask for something and then not give it. So, and I think, again, it's the question I probably get asked most often when we're engaging with companies to hire for them. What should we do about this? Or what should our hybrid model look like? Or start times, finish times, and so forth. It's actually interesting. I was actually having this conversation only this morning with someone, and we were talking about how 20 years ago, 25 years ago, smartphones and so forth weren't a thing. And as a result, you'd come to the office, you turn on your computer, you do your work, say from 9 till 5 or maybe 8 till 6, whatever it was. You switched off, you go home. And your home life was your home life. You weren't checking emails, you weren't checking LinkedIn, you weren't getting texts or anything like that.
The right to disconnect was disconnected naturally back then.
That's right. It was the norm.
It was the norm.
That's right.
Now it's coming as legislation, hasn't it?
And in some ways, I think that potentially made us more focused and productive in work hours because it's when you got stuff done.
Yes.
And it also meant that we truly could disconnect, and our weekends were our weekends, and our evenings were for family time. They were great times. That's right. And I look back kind of fondly at that time, and I think what we now have is ambiguity. Now, there's an opportunity in ambiguity, but most people aren't comfortable with ambiguity.
No.
So people like to categorize, they like to label, they like structure, and that's just tough because everyone chooses to do it different, and I think that takes a different type of leadership. But for me, you've got to tie that back into your strategic intent and your company goals,
and being outcome focused
and
rather
outcome focused.
Than on.
That's right,
because they're two different things. You can just be expecting people to be on from 7 till 6 or 8 till 5, whatever it is, or just be outcome focused and weave flexibility into people's roles and just know that they're just going to get the job done.
Exactly right.
And they're very different things.
That's right. And you also spoke there about the importance of being, I guess, part of something in terms of knowing your colleagues, knowing your stakeholders, knowing the pain points, the business problems. And I'd also say, if I look back at your career in that time with Freehills, I think probably one of my assumption is one of the reasons why you were able to transition into different functions is because you kind of knew the mechanics of how the business ticked. And you always can't hire that or buy that.
No,
you knew the culture.
Yes, that's right. And you have to want to get to know the person, the problems people are trying to solve, but that's the relation. That's the stakeholder management relationship part. And I do love that part because I actually love dealing with people, but that's what you don't get working from home.
That's right.
If you're new to an organisation, sure, you can do Teams calls, but I think there's a part of this part that has to happen first to be able to make productive virtual meetings, and it's the coffee catch-ups and it's the casual encounters that you have in tea room. They're the relationship encounters, and that's really important.
Humans have accomplished what we've accomplished because we're social.
Yes.
We collaborate, we work together, we share ideas, we communicate. That's why we put a rocket in space and a person on the moon. It's not because we sat at home and we ticked off a to-do list.
No.
But I sound, and you have to be really careful with those statements, by the way, because you sound like, you're kind of advocating for the good old days and a 5, and
they're both good. They're both good.
There's elements of both, and you have to be able to bring them together.
Yeah, I think flexibility. Honestly, if we look at the now, because we don't want to focus too much on the make us sound old too, but there is wonderful flexibility with people with young families. There is some fabulous flexibility that happened through COVID where. Being in technology, we're a bit spoilt because we've had that virtual teams, global roles. We've all done that. We've been doing that way before COVID. But I think there is flexibility that came from COVID. Parent-teacher interviews, like my husband's a teacher. He can do that at home now.
Yeah.
And it's actually great for parents because you don't have to run through the city to get to school for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
There's some fabulous things that flexibility has created. I think it's just making sure you get the balance right.
100%. Let's go back to Freehill. So you were there 18 years. That must have been hard to make the decision to move on.
It was. I remember that time very clearly. I was deep in some transformative work for a couple of years actually, and there was a consultancy company I was working with, and they had come in and they were doing work with us.
Yeah.
And they asked me to join them. Right. And my son I'm pretty sure I was just back from maternity leave. And it's all about timing, right? And I remember thinking, the timing's just not right. I've got 2 kids at home, new job, and flexibility wasn't there at the time. And I said, look, timing's not great. And we kept on doing work. And then a year later, can you come join us? Timing still wasn't great. The third time, my daughter was just about to start school. My son was 3. And I thought, I'm probably not going to get asked forever.
Yeah.
And the other part that I was conscious of was when you're at a workplace for so long, it's the only thing on your CV. The attractive thing about G-Tronics, or now UXC that became DXC, that's you've probably seen on my profile, was that it was the ability to leave my beautiful family at Freehills, but then not just work for an employer, but get to know many industries as a consultant.
Yeah.
And I knew that I could time box that. I'm very fortunate that I am married to a wonderful man that has supported my career, who's a teacher. So we have this lovely yin yang that we can shape our beautiful children that we've raised, but we haven't got 2 corporate people working really long hours. So I made that break and I was able to still balance life at home, but the kids were old enough to make that work as well, because I knew there'd be a bit of travel, but I knew that I'd get to know banking and government, insurance and health and mining and agriculture. I could go on and on, but I had one employer. And I did like, as you can see by Freehills, I do like being at some place for a little time. I didn't want to bounce around having a gig at many places. And so that's why I did that, because I wanted to break into the world of what else is out there and do a lot without moving every 5 seconds.
Yeah, amazing. I think you've just answered like my next 10 questions. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what the advantage you get when you go to a big consulting firm.
That's
you get to kind of look under the lid of everything.
You do.
And kind of see what you like and make different connections and so forth. So the other thing I was going to say to you is I actually spent my first 16 years with one company. And went through a lot of growth, and the way I can see the way that you talk about them and the way you feel about them, I feel exactly the same about that organisation.
Yeah.
But actually leaving them, I felt like I'd accomplished so much, but I wanted to go and see if I could do it somewhere else as well. There was a bit of a personal test, as in, can I take these learnings? Do I really want to be in one place for my whole career? Or is there more that the world could potentially offer as well?
Yeah, that's right. Spot on.
And I could have stayed there and I'd probably still be there. Yeah, and it was great.
I would probably be the same.
I had no reason to leave, and I'm still in touch with a lot of the people from that business for exactly the same reasons you mentioned. But it is good to test yourself, I think. And again, you can look at 18 years and just kind of say, oh God, 18 years, one company. But you probably had half a dozen or more jobs.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And just because the same name was above the door, it doesn't mean you were doing the same thing for 18 years. I think that's the
and you
big
still got
difference.
to do M&A and all the things that were happening at the time. And I think the other thing is, it's not like there's no development that happens during that time too, because you continue to have development, investment and training. And I was studying all that time. But yeah, I think you're probably like me. You do feel a sense of fondness all the time when you speak about them. And I do feel that a little bit right now with Urbis because they're shareholder partnership. And I'm sure we'll get to that. But, you still have that partnership, I think, is the reason why I love where I am, because I just love the partnership model.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
yeah, you're right.
Yes, obviously loyalty and kind of connection is important to you.
It is.
So you've then gone to work in a consultancy where you work for the consultancy, you're on site with a client delivering a project. As a consultant, how do you kind of manage, I don't know the right way to phrase that is, but kind of keeping the interests of your employer over the interests of your client?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because actually my first placement, if you like, I've gone from Australian company to global company, 35,000 employees, but in saying that, Australian arm, so much more, niche, family orientated and a beautiful team, but straight out to Cadbury Schweppes. And a placement on site. And so it did feel a little bit like, obviously you feel like your employee's here, but you also, that was quite an intense role of transformation for them. So I went straight on site. I was based on site 24/7. And I had a great team out there as well. So I knew where my loyalties lie, but I still it was 50-50 because I had a great team on site, got to build that. And that was a transformative part of Cadbury's. And when they acquired Schweppes and everything that went on there, and really didn't like the smell of chocolate after I left. So,
Did you ever feel the pinch of being in the middle?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you do. Because there is a part of, I've got to be careful what I say, but there is a margin side. There is a people in, that you work with too close to, with other people that you work with that are part of your consultancy company. There's a lot of things that can happen and you've got to keep that delivery line. There is actually, you can't just go over to one side.
Yeah.
You do have to make sure that you're keeping the client happy, but you also are part of your employer. And your loyalty is absolutely with the employers, but you have to keep both sides happy.
And I saw through this time, you were really kind of, I suppose, establishing your brand around delivering projects, transformation, programs, etc.
Yeah.
And I think what stood out for me, and I've got a list here, and I'm going to have to refer to the list, but I saw just some of the brands that you worked with, right? You mentioned Cadbury Schweppes, but there was Linfox, Medibank, Repco, Rio Tinto, ANZ. There were so many different places, and as you said, there's different industries to learn from. But I'm assuming that as you're building that brand and your skill around being a project program transformation person, you're also seeing so many different ways to do things.
Yes, that's right. And it was quite a unique consultancy role, because what it was I suppose most people look at companies like Getronics, DXE, UXE, what they are now, as outsourcers. And in a sense, the larger organisations are outsourcers. The wonderful thing about the work that we did was we would go into an organisation, help them build their business case to outsource a managed service. And the managed service would also include bringing people from the organisation, like a Linfox or a Repco or a Medibank or a Shell, and those people would not be out of jobs. They would come and be in my team. So I would build the team on site that would deliver, service desk, data centre, project portfolio management, anything that we had to do to manage the organisation. And that was the unique part. And that's why I loved the role, because we weren't going in and just removing an entire team, clearing them out and saying offshore or something like that. And then you did. I sat on site. So I'd have my weeks sitting on site at a bit of Shell or a bit of Repco, a bit of Linfox. So you would sit in amongst it, managing your team, speaking to your stakeholder, being the client, and managing that portfolio. So it was probably less about program management and more about the entire service model that we would deliver. Because Linfox or any of those accounts that I ran would trust you to manage everything.
Got it.
And so it was really beautiful. And there'd be a PMO, so we deliver projects, but then we had anything else that they wanted to do. So it really was exposure under the hood to all these companies. So it was beautiful.
What do you think, was there opportunity in that to kind of share best practice across those, like confidentially, obviously, of course, right? But best practice Shell are doing this, so that's interesting. Maybe Medibank could do something similar. As in,
yes,
because I think that's one of the other plus sides of using a consultancy, right? You're getting a kind of a world view, let's put it that way, rather than a local view of how things can be done.
And things get better and better and better as time goes on, or you might implement ITIL in an organisation, or there may be precedents and processes that you can lift and shift to help people improve quite fast. And I suppose that's what consultancy does, right? It helps you get to where you're going. You understand the current state. You might have an interim state and a future state, but when you're part of a consultant, when you've got a consultant doing that with you, you can identify the current state and then talk to your stakeholders about how far they want to go and how quickly.
Yeah. Okay.
But then there's obviously budget constraints that people have, like I have today. So, that you get to shape the world with them, and they choose how mature they want to be. And one of the things I've learned in my journey in technology for so long is that everyone looks polished from the outside. And they are just not. In fact, I can't think of one global company that's not bad, but everyone has their warts.
Yeah.
And I think in the world of cybersecurity now, everyone has major warts because no one's been able to keep up. But we've had to invest pretty quickly.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think when you look at your profile, and I definitely made this assumption, which I think the more I talk to you, the more I learn it's incorrect, is you're the project management person.
No.
You're not. I'd actually kind of describe you as like the enabler.
Yes, and that's my side gig, and that's where I started, but I've moved away from that a long time ago.
Yeah, that's right.
But it obviously helps what you do every day because you have a mindset.
Well, it's still a mindset to a project is a project. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's still about getting people, aligned to an outcome.
Yeah.
And then helping them to achieve the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And whether that's a project or, as you say, other kind of things that you would have been involved in. As you're working through that, though, and you're kind of affecting change and making stuff happen, what kind of typical problems would you encounter, or what kind of pitfalls would you come across?
When managing projects, you mean? Or?
Yeah, just kind of in trying to affect those that influencing, let's say, from a consultancy perspective to make change happen. Yeah,
I think, one of the things you have to think about is who is the change going to impact?
Yeah.
So that's really important because in some places, that we've had to do major transformation, and some places do it really well. Like Cadbury's did it really well. You've got change and comms. Change, organisational change management, comms, training, that's a big passion of mine, because if you can't think about who you're going to impact with what you're doing, then you've already failed. So yes, you can have the best project management plan, you can have the best deep dive, you can set it all up, you can have a raid, all those things. But you have to have your stakeholders on board. So if you're not doing stakeholder management, you're 50% failed. And then if you're not thinking about how people feel on the other end of the change, then that's going to impact you as well. And so particularly as consultants, some of the places we worked, it might be aggressive change, but you've still got to think about that and call that out. Like, what does that mean for your people? Yeah. How are they going to learn that? It depends on the project. If you're doing transformative work where you're taking a major capability away and delivering something new, but someone wants to cut costs and there is no change, you're going to have to be prepared that the sentiment on how people feel and how successful it is might be quite poor.
Yep.
And sometimes that did happen. There'll be budgets that we had to work with that stakeholders would say, we'll take it, we'll cop it. And so as consultants, you just do it because you have to, because you're not employees, you're delivering a service. So, there are prices to pay on how you run transformations. And really, that's probably where the project management headspace comes in, and phasing of project management, which is what I do with my team, is work through all the phases of project management, call out all the things you need to do. And sometimes there are budget constraints or your stakeholder says, I need to cut that out. But so long as you call out the impact, and that you might impact the employee value prop, you might go too fast and there's no adoption. These things really aren't just project management, they're part of change.
Yeah. I read something recently that was saying that most projects essentially are never delivered on budget, right? The budget always gets blown out. Doesn't matter what it is, from the bloody Westgate Tunnel through to an internal kind of rollout of a system. But the actual argument the person was putting forward is if that's because humans are really bad at forecasting and budgeting and predicting risk. But secondly, if people knew the true cost of a project, it would probably never get signed off in the first place.
No, we'll take the Opera House and how much do we love that one, right? So that was a very good case study.
There's many of these, so we shouldn't be kind of surprised or offended. It's only when a project is massively over budget and it fails to deliver the outcome, I think is when people get most upset.
That's right.
But in terms of that kind of risk management, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest aspects around projects, right? So how do you get that right? How do you or transformation, in general, how do you kind of really mitigate that risk and plan for it?
I think it's about understanding what your end goal is, like identifying what success looks like at the other end and being really clear about that. I always like to sort of visualize what boxes you would tick to say you're successful. Because if everyone, and obviously it's not just technology and not just digital, it's all your stakeholders. So you notify who are the people that are part of the journey, and you agree on, when we see ourselves at the other end, what boxes do we want to tick? And that's really important because you actually do that before you start. And there could be something small there, like we want adoption to be at this, or we want to make sure that our employee survey ticks the digital box, being we love the change you're doing. Or we might just say, we don't care. We want to just merge the companies and we want to make sure we get them together, and we've got a whole lot of tech debt there, but we've merged. Like, they're all different because it will depend on your risk appetite, your budgets, your timeline, and every organisation is quite different in that respect. But so long as everyone's on the same page, you might call out above the line is happiness and all these things, but below the line we said we'd rip it out. And we're going to cop it, but you call it out up front. So when you actually know that you've delivered and you've got some things, some activities that have perhaps called out that we're not happy about something, I don't know, the technology doesn't suit everyone, you made those calls up front. And that can still mean you're successful, but you said you don't care. And that usually happens. And change, quite frankly, in my whole career, change management is the one that cops it every time.
Right, why's that?
People don't want to pay for it. And I'm passionate about change and comms and organisational change management. For some reason, it's the line item that will say, oh, can you squeeze it in? Oh, actually, we don't want to pay for training. It's the one thing that companies in my entire career will pull out or reduce. And
is that, you say people, are we talking
management?
Finance directors? Are we talking CFOs, CEO?
Oh, look, usually it's not even that. I've actually found it's more the firm or the company that you're working with that will say, we've got budget constraints, where can we pull money? And some do it better than others. You know, Australia Post did organisational change management very well. I had a fabulous change manager there. They're rare. Wes Farmers did change management really well, but they're the ones that have gone, we've got some scars now, we need to plan that phase, and they think about it. And a good change manager will look at the project of where you are, where you're going. They'll do a wonderful document. They'll even write every phase of comms. They'll write every email, every part of that journey. Everyone signs it off before you start. Like, it's beautiful. And when you've had that experience, you don't ever want to give that up.
I think in my experience, and by the way, you're not the first person that said exactly that statement about change to me. I was having this conversation just last week on the podcast, and we were talking about a couple of things around this. Firstly, I think there's an assumption that transformation is change. So if I've got a project manager, therefore they're changing something, so therefore it's changed. So why am I paying twice? Right. So I think there's an element of that. And I think the second thing, and this is often played in my mind, kind of sitting from outside looking in, is I reckon change manager is the worst job title in the world. Because you walk in the room, I'm the change manager, like 80% of the room don't like you immediately, right? Because you're here to make my life different.
That's why you call them digital enablement managers like ours.
Well, this is what we talked about. Should we just relabel it as the implementation or digital enablement? I'm going to steal that. There you go, that's done.
And she's fabulous. But yes, you're right. It has a negative connotation to it.
It does. That's right. There are semantics. And I think semantics, and you touched on earlier, communication. And then people hear things, and they hear buzzwords, and they hear change. Oh God, this is the change manager. Oh, already uncomfortable. Digital implementation manager. Oh, that sounds modern and contemporary, and I want to be high tech. It makes subtle difference, and I think those little things are the difference to a successful outcome as well.
Absolutely.
I saw that with G-Tronics, I think you moved into a role, so it was APAC Managed Services Consultant.
That's right.
Did that involve a lot of travel?
It did.
Yeah, how did you balance that?
It was fun. I look back now, actually, I think I said to my husband the day, we were looking at somebody dropping children off at childcare, and I said, I can't really remember those days. And Steve said to me, you've clearly wiped that out of your brain, you know? It was organised chaos. Like, you just had to be really organised with 2 young children. But it was, Yeah, sometimes. But I think the way I managed all of that was just Steve being a teacher, we'd sometimes drop the car off at childcare, leave the car at childcare. You know, one of us would go to work, the other one would get the cab to the childcare, then drive home. It was sometimes I crammed a lot more than someone without children. So I would sometimes do 3 states in one day, you know, because I didn't want to be away from the kids too long and it was disruptive. But it was a necessary part of my role. But I did have great home support, so that was great. But we don't have family close by, so we didn't get that support network. But we managed. You just do. But yeah, sometimes I just crammed a lot.
Did it involve international travel too?
Not at Getronics. At my other roles it did, but the kids were a bit older. Getronics, no, it was mostly Australia, thankfully. But quite often it would be, you know, Melbourne to Canberra, Canberra to Sydney, Sydney to Newcastle or something like that, because I had Tom go all the way up. So it would be, you know, I can clearly remember one day waking up thinking, which state am I in? Where have I woken up? So it was really odd. But yeah, I mean, you just manage. You just have to be really organised.
Look, it is. And I think it's, you know, it's one of the challenges of building a career in Australia. It's an opportunity, but it's a challenge too, right? As in, you know, you fly from here to the Sunshine Coast. That's like flying from London to Rome.
Yes.
You fly from here to Perth. It's like flying from London to Istanbul. As in, they're big distances, and you wouldn't do that for a day for business. No. As in, someone, if you're in the UK, you think they were mad. But you're building the same career in the UK, and you're going from London to Bristol to Birmingham to Manchester. Well, that's like driving from Melbourne to Geelong.
And it's also a little bit internationally feeling, because you still have to get to the airport much earlier, because it's an international gig, like flight.
That's right.
So it's a little bit different. It's not as straightforward as Melbourne to Sydney, you know. That's
right. And I think it's contextual to the country.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when you look at Australia, it is probably a small number of very big cities, but very far apart on the coast around this enormous landmass.
But we all speak the same language, so that makes it
and the same currency, so you don't feel like you're going overseas. That's right. But it is.
Yeah.
So it's all in your mind more than anything else, I guess, than anything else. So I'm just interested, before we kind of move on to where you kind of went next, through that period, it's obviously an incredible step away from Freehills to kind of what you did. How were you kind of intentionally shaping your career through that, and what were you thinking you wanted to go to next?
Yeah, I think when I found that, particularly around managed services, I got exposed to every part of technology, you know, and so that started shaping, I think, my interests. So I was with Getronics for a little while. The GFC hit. It was a pretty unpleasant time, quite frankly. You know, I'm not going to lie. It was probably definitely the low point in my career. Going out to the big wide world, 1 minute you're an executive, you're really successful, and then your role is moved or redundant. And there were many of us out in the big wide world at that time, and there were many companies just shedding technology roles. So, you know, I found myself in that. I was lucky to have had Getronics took quite good care of me, and there was a first round, then I had another 6 months, and I did some additional study, and then my role was made redundant.
Yeah.
And I found myself in the world of Melbourne with many other executives. And it was really confronting, is probably the best way to put it. Yep. And, you know, you had 2 choices. You could take a little walk in the park and take a long time to get a role, and I found that would make it harder to actually get yourself back into it. Or you could go out there, warts and all, and go for roles where you knew your expertise could be leveraged.
Yep.
And so I started doing that, did the coffee catch-ups, really went out and shook up my network. It was hard. It was a really hard time. I remember going for one interview, and I won't say the company because it's was a really interesting experience to be in an interview, and this guy said to me, first round coffee catch up, "Oh God, I love you on my team. You're overqualified, but I'd love you to come and work with us and help our transformation." And I went, "Oh, great." And then I came with a second interview, and I was in this room. It's obviously very male-dominated industry at the time, and still is a little bit. And I'm in a room, and one of the interview questions was, what would you do if I put you in front of the board and I blamed you and I asked you something, and how would you defend yourself? And you would have to take the blame. And I'm sitting there going, this is really a strange question. So I can't even remember what I said, but I got out of it and I got the role really quick. I got the role before I even got home. And I remember sitting there thinking, I know I want to roll fast, but I can't work for someone that I'm not physically, cannot be loyal to and could possibly treat me that way. And it was a really bold thing to do, and I declined. And I still remember the feeling that I felt, because it was a sinking feeling. And then I went for another role, was at Wesfarmers. It was through my network. And I remember looking at the title, it didn't thrill me, but I got the role. It was a transformative role. It was the biggest Wesfarmers project at the time. And I remember still feeling quite upset that I was going to get this role. I wasn't thrilled about it. Coincidentally, I got the role, and I got the role when I was at the airport. I was with my family. Getronics had gifted me a Managing Director's Award. And it was the most beautiful feeling on earth, and I hadn't used the award, and it was a very large travel voucher. And I remember our MD saying, normally I would send you to the sales conference, but I've decided I'm the MD. This is the beautiful Paul Timmins. I'm the MD, and I can do anything I want. And so I got a travel voucher, and we were at the airport, the four of us, and we were going to Broome. And I landed the role, and we were at the airport, and I just felt this sense of relief. And I remember Steve and I gave each other a big hug, and the kids were jumping around with joy. Mum's going to be all right. And got the contract at the airport, signed it, and had a beautiful holiday, came back and turned up at the Coles head office, the big black building that everyone knows in Taronga, and really scared of what I was going to walk into. And I suppose it was definitely the most pivotal moment in my career, because what I walked into has shaped me as a leader. It's shaped me as a person. It's made me brave. It's made me vulnerable. And I walked into a couple of hundred people offshore, quite a few hundred people onshore, and I got asked to deliver this massive e-commerce platform to really change the way Coles delivered online. It was called Project Lemon for a reason. And it really was absolutely screwed. And so I worked with a really amazing team. I've still got my Coles girls, as we call ourselves today. We still meet up, every couple of months. I love them dearly, and we went through a lot together. Business case paid itself off pretty quickly, but it was an outcome-based role. Regardless of, that's probably one thing I would tell everyone, is don't look at the title. Look at what you will achieve in that. So I learned how to be a leader. I learned stakeholder management. I learned how to influence. I learned business case collation, NPV, hurdle rates. There's a whole lot I had to throw myself into and focus on the outcome. And in that, I got to bank my redundancy because I just went in. So, I think you have choices in life. You can wait a long time, and it's harder to get a job when you're not in a job.
Yes, that's a really good. I think you're absolutely right with that, by the way.
Yeah.
God, I'm gonna wheel back. There's so many things you said in that in that monologue that was amazing. Let's talk about redundancy, because it is a very vulnerable experience, and I think sadly there's probably a lot of people that have experienced that recently because of sort of the economic conditions that we're going through at the moment. So if you were to look back at that time with the benefit of hindsight, what kind of advice would you give someone that's faced with that situation right now?
It's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel sad. It's not okay to think it's about you.
Yeah.
Because it's not about you. And you get told that. Unfortunately, lots of people give you advice, you'll be okay. One door closes, another one opens. Like, you just don't want to hear that stuff because everyone will say it to you. And you'll look back and all these things. Just focus on you. Make sure you're okay. Make sure you've got someone to lean on. I've had a few redundancies. I'm not scared to say it. I've learned every time. It's our industry. It's the world, right? Yeah. I'd say always plan for redundancy. And that's what I did after that moment, because I got made redundant another 2 times after that. Plan to be redundant. Plan that your role may be no longer required. Make sure you're always throwing yourself into new study. Don't become redundant. You can be redundant, don't become redundant. Yeah. Because it can happen. Technology industries like that, our world's like that. The years of you and I working 16 and 18 years in one spot, they're very rare, unfortunately. but don't make it about you, because sometimes it's not. And sometimes take a role just to get into it again. And even if you don't like it, just stay relevant. Find yourself a network of people and just, use that network. I had Aiton, I had Claire Burke, I had some people around me that helped me during my time and gave me some consulting gigs. And you just use your network. There are beautiful people around you that will just help you, even if it means getting a contract role. And there's two types of people. There's someone who wants to be a permanent and like the loyalty, like me, and you can go for the contract role. I did that for a year or so. It's not my thing, but it helps pay the bills. And you can do that long term. And lots of people are contractors for many years and they love it. It's just not my thing. But I think it's okay to feel really sad about it, but don't make it about you.
Absolutely. Again, there's a few things there. I think you're right. Contracting is for some people, not for others. But the only way sometimes that is to try it. But if you don't feel it, get out, get into permanent, because it's going to create anxiety and you're not going to enjoy work. You're not going to feel secure. You're not going to feel committed to the organisation. So your kind of job satisfaction is going to fundamentally drop. I think the other thing you mentioned there, which is about network, and it's something I advise people all the time when I speak with them. I was actually, again, talking to a guy this morning, and he just completed a Spartan race on the weekend, and we were talking about that. But I gave him that as a metaphor. I said, you would not have turned up at that Spartan race without training, thinking about your diet, your nutrition, your rest. You would have done 3 months minimum worth of training to achieve exactly what you set out to achieve. I said, looking for a job is the same. So don't wait until you're at the start line to start putting the habits in place to look for a job. It should be a permanent habit. It should be an hour a week, maybe 2 hours maximum per week, reconnecting with your network, using LinkedIn, seeing what people are up to, engaging, having a coffee, having a Teams call. Just keep talking to people, and keep it doesn't need to be a big network, a small intimate network of people that know you deeply, because you never know what's around the corner. And you may need to call on those people. Yes. And if you've invested throughout, and that sounds quite calculated, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying invest in those people before you need them. That's the key. And that's the training. That's the preparation. And hopefully you never do. You never find yourself at the start of that redundancy start line. But you've got a good network of people. That's right. But conversely, they may find themselves in that situation, and you've invested in them as well. So I think it should be an ongoing habit. The other thing you spoke about there is, and I think you're right, when opportunities come along, may not be the perfect job, but throw yourself in. But what I love about your story there was that you felt from the interview process there was no alignment with your personal values. It didn't align with your culture. It was, you were going to go into an environment, and I think what I really admire about you is you've got a very true sense of who you are, and you've worked in great places that have enabled that to bring out the best in you. And you got red flags and you listened to them. And I speak to people all too often that don't listen to the red flags. Maybe there's a big shiny paycheck, or they're conscious of needing to pay bills, so they take a job and they're miserable and they're unhappy. And then they think, now I've got to stay here for 18 months, 2 years because my resume will look bad. So, this is a disaster. And then they're not really performing at work, and it just creates stress, and it comes down to your personal values, I think. And I think that you've got to stay as true to that as you possibly can. Absolutely. But also, if you go somewhere and it's wrong, get out of Dodge, right? Don't hang around. That's right. Because no one's ultimately, or the right people won't judge you for making that decision. And you spend a lot of time at work. Going back to that development plan I was talking about before, one of the ways I introduced that to my team last year was we spend most of our lives at work. You have to be happy at work, but you have to be happy at home and happy at work, because it's a balance. Yes, that's right. So if you've got a really toxic company that you're working with, you're not going to want to get out of bed every day. And I call it the spring factor. If you can spring out of bed, even on the hardest day, and go, I'm getting up to go to work today, then you've got the right job. If you drag yourself on Monday and you can't wait for Friday, or you can't wait for 6 o'clock or whatever, you're in the wrong job. So get out there and put yourself out to your networks and get out, because life's too short to be unhappy. That's the end of part 1. We'll see you again for more this Saturday for part 2. Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's Emmbr LinkedIn page for for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.